Hi, welcome back to Jacques in the Garden. In today's video, we're going to be talking how I flip a bed. And what I mean by flipping a bed is how do I take a bed that has something growing in it, like that bed over there for example, and turn it into a brand new, refreshed bed with new planting in it. And the way we're going to do that bed flip today is in a minimal or low tillage style. And what I mean by that is we're going to disturb the original bed soil as little as we possibly can. And in this particular example, this is actually a lasagna bed. So before we get into the actual process, I wanted to talk a little bit about the benefits and the reasons why I decided to flip this bed in this manner. So the main benefit of doing a low tillage bed flip is that you're going to be disturbing the soil food web as little as possible. And what that means is you're going to be disturbing all the worms, the fungal mycorrhizal networks, the bacteria, the nematodes, everything in there as little as possible, because they've been in there for now over a year trying to work that soil and build up their diverse soil food web. And so by coming in and disturbing it, we're just setting our bed back in time. So in order to avoid doing that, what we're going to do is we're simply going to aerate this bed using a broad fork, and I'll show you an alternative to that. And then we're going to simply layer a carbon layer on top and then cover that in mulch. And in this case, the mulch is actually going to be a compost. So the idea behind this is that the carbon from the straw is going to feed the soil food web, so we want that at the base. It's also going to help act as like another weed suppressant mat. And then what we're going to do is put all this compost right on top of it, and that's going to act as our growing medium. So all these plants right now are transplanted into this compost mixture. So without further ado, I want to show you guys how I take a bed that looked just like that and turn it into a bed like this. So if that sounds good to you, sounds interesting, why don't you hit the like button and let's get into it. Just a quick note before we get into this low tillage flip, I decided I wanted to do a demonstration of exactly what that method is. And it's going to be pretty nice because we're going to have an example of the two different systems right next to each other. So with that in mind, let's get into the tools. All right, so these are all the tools that I'm going to be using to do this bed flip today. The first two are just hand tools, so snips or clippers. I'm mostly going to use this to go at the base of a plant and cut it right where the roots are intersecting with the ground. And that's the typical way you would do things in a low tillage system, because you want to leave the roots in the ground as often as possible. You'll see in this video that a lot of the plants I actually end up pulling out, and that's because there are things that are perennial, like herbs, for example, or a pepper that I wanted to overwinter. So in those examples, you would actually be removing the plant and the roots themselves, but otherwise, all you want to do is come out the bottom of a plant and give it a snip. So after that, just a nice trowel, whatever you want to use. This is going to be mostly used for transplanting and also for pulling out, like the pepper, for example. Now onto the bigger tools. There's really two main tools that I'm going to be using here. First is this level head rake. So it's called a level head rake because right here it's level, it's flat. It's really nice because when you have a level head rake, you could come in at the floor and smooth out really nicely the surface of your bed. The other nice thing about this is that it has these kind of aggressive square teeth. That makes it really easy to move heavy things, or not heavy, but coarse things like a compost, for instance. It does a really good job of picking up all the bits, and it also lets you dig in a little bit if you want to mix in some amendments. So definitely one of my favorite tools. I got this one at Corona. Then over here, we go into the aeration tools, as I'll call them. This right here is a digging fork, also from Corona. It's really nice because it has curves on the back of the tines, but then it's flat on the front. It makes it really easy to kind of step on it and just dig right into the ground. So what we're going to be using this for is as a sort of substitute for a broad fork, because honestly, a broad fork is something that's really fantastic to have if you have it, but they are quite pricey for a limited use tool. So luckily Kevin has one, so I was able to borrow this for the project today. But I wanted to also show you guys the alternative of using a digging fork. So with that in mind, let's take a look at the bed before I really rip into it. So before I get into the actual flipping of this bed, let's talk a little bit about what's going on in here right now. So you see up here I have this big patch of sweet marjoram. I kind of put it there on a whim, but I ended up really liking it there because in the spring and summer it'll create these big flowers, which the bees absolutely go crazy for. So it's a really good way to bring pollinators here, and it's a very delicious herb, I have to say. So what we're gonna do there is cut it back very aggressively, and it'll be totally fine. I'll show you guys that later. I have some of these summer flowers that are starting to not look so good. So I have these zinnias here, and they're starting to have a lot of disease issues. Don't really need them anymore. I'm gonna switch to more cool flowers, things like calendula, which I have some volunteers here. We'll talk about how I deal with that later. As we kind of go down the line here, I have a couple more things I need to deal with. So I have this pepper here. It's still quite productive. I might forego some of the production, trim it back, leave it there. We'll see. If I don't like the way the spacing works out with what I plant here, I'll probably actually dig it out and overwinter it in a pot. So that's another option. This winter savory, my best guess of what I'd like to do with this right now is I'll probably fully cut it back, dig it out, and dry the majority of the herb to save it for the winter so I could use it. And other than that, most of everything else here is probably gonna come out. And then we'll get into the amending, and then I'll show you what I'm gonna put in here next. First things first is I have to deal with this sweet marjoram here. I also have a couple beets, so I'll probably pull those and roast them for dinner. So why don't we go ahead and start with that. There's a nice little one. And this one's a bit bigger. You can actually see there's some mycorrhizal activity there. So I know that this bed is pretty healthy right off the bat. Let's set those aside. What I have here is this, I guess I'm gonna call it a weed because I didn't actually plant it. It's been popping up all over my garden. It's called dichondria, I believe. It's one of these things that is actually oftentimes used as a ground cover because you could see I'm crushing it, but it doesn't seem to care at all. So I'm actually gonna try to remove it from here just because I don't want it to take over the whole bed. That might be a little more involved, so I'm not gonna focus on that right now. But what I'm gonna do over here is I'm gonna start by taking some very aggressive prunes out of this sweet marjoram. And I brought that tray there just so I could keep my herbs sort of clean. So yeah, I'm gonna just do that right now. Right there, what I did is I actually just pulled on the plant. And you could see that this is one of these plants that can actually root itself by just contacting soil. So if I wanted to, I could take this branch right here. It's actually a really nice size. Throw that in a pot of soil, and that'll turn into its own little cutting right there. So I'll probably set that aside just in case I do want to propagate this somewhere else. But yeah, that's there's plenty of plant here. So I'm actually probably gonna just switch to yanking it right now, just because I want to get this sort of sorted. All right. So I ended up just pulling that whole clump right there because this plant's kind of gone out of control. So I'm gonna set this aside. I think I will actually repot this just because it's such a nice clump. But I'm pretty happy with how much removal I have here. I'm gonna move on to the rest of the bed. So this kind of plant right here, this ground cover plant that I mentioned earlier, it's one of these that creeps. So what I did is I just put my hand underneath the plant itself and I just lift it up. You can see that's how it spreads, is it shoots out these little runners, and then when they find soil, they'll burrow down and then start a new offshoot. So I'm gonna do that to the rest of this plant right here. All right, so there you have it. That's a major part of the bed cleanup that I needed to do. So I'm gonna go ahead and move on to the next part. Now this is the upper section of the bed. So I have a few more choices I have to make here. Easy ones are gonna be pulling the beet. Actually, that just kind of popped out as soon as I touched it. There's another one hiding back here. So that's a little tip I like a lot, is on the edges of beds or in between plants, I'll often throw some beets because their roots don't really compete with anything much and they don't really grow that large. So it's a nice thing to kind of mix into your beds to add a lot more growth. Now, some easy decisions are this flower right here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my clippers, I'm gonna move the soil away, and as close as I can to the base, I'm gonna grab it and snip it. Just like that. So that's cleared. Now for the rest of the bed, I'm gonna be doing some shaping cuts and I'll probably be digging out this pepper over here. All right, at this point, I've gone over a lot of little details and I'm just gonna go into autopilot and start clearing off the rest of this bed. So now I've cleared most of the bed. You can see it definitely looks like a mess, the bed. That's all right. What I'm gonna do now is try to move as much of the irrigation as I can, and then we'll go on to the next step, which is rebuilding the bed, adding amendments, putting compost on, all that sort of stuff. And I'll explain my reasoning as to why I've left some plants where I've left them when I get into the transplant phase. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that now. All right, so this right here is a soil moisture monitor that actually pairs with my weather station. So I'm gonna go ahead, pop that out until I decide where I wanna put it again. You did see it can be pretty annoying to pull out all your drip irrigation just because of all the staples and everything. But really it's kind of the price you have to pay for some water savings. Now, I wouldn't always do this substantial of a cleanup where I move everything, but I'm gonna be adding a lot more compost this year. So I really needed to clear it up as best as I can before I do that. So let's go ahead and do that next. All right, so there's our compost. Wanted to talk a little bit about it. This is a new product I got. It's a blend of 50-50 organic-based compost with manures and 50-50 with a green compost. So that's like what you would make at home, things that are just greens and browns. So the reason why I went for this is that I wanted some manure-based compost for this winter and fall season vegetable planting, because things like broccoli and cauliflower and kale, things that I'm gonna be planting right now, are things that require a lot of nitrogen. So this manure is gonna do a great job at giving it a plentiful, nutritious kickstart. So the great thing about that is that essentially they're gonna eat up a lot of that extra nitrogen while they're growing, and the compost is gonna keep maturing into the spring. So when I get into my more fruiting plants, I'll have a little less nitrogen, but I'll still have a lot of the phosphorus and potassium from this compost. I'm also gonna be adding in a little of my own compost just because I have it. And honestly, the best compost you could get is the stuff that you make at home. So there's only one more thing we really need to do before we put all the compost on the bed, and that's aerate the bed using the broad fork. And also I'm gonna add a lot of browns, and I'll show you how I do that. So I mentioned that we're gonna do some aeration to this bed now. And like I said, I borrowed this broad fork from Kevin, but I'm gonna show you how to use the digging fork to accomplish the same task in a moment. But when you're using a broad fork, it's really important that, first of all, you wanna dig down as deep as you can. And this is what I'm getting into when I said that this is gonna be a minimal tillage flip. So if you were doing entirely no-till, some would say that you shouldn't even use a broad fork, but we're not here to get into semantics. The idea is that you step on it and you pull back. And really the most critical thing about using a broad fork properly is that when you do that pull back, you don't actually wanna pull it all the way down as far as you can, because then what you're doing is you're inverting the soil layers. And we're not trying to do that. So what we're trying to do here is really inject as much oxygen as we can into the deeper parts of the bed. And at the same time, if there's any compaction here, this is actually gonna help break up that compaction. So you can see I'm pulling back, but I'm not pushing it all the way down as far as I can. Let's go over how to use this instead of the broad fork here. Same principle actually. The only annoying thing is that, I'm gonna show you really quick, is that this digging fork, you're gonna have to do it 3 times as often to accomplish the same amount of coverage that you get with the broad fork. So what I'm gonna do is, same idea, step down, work it in, and then pull back. So you can see, I'm basically doing the exact same thing. It's just gonna take a little bit longer. Now the advantage, of course, is that this is like a, I don't know, $30, $40 digging fork, whereas something like a broad fork is gonna cost you around $200. So anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and finish doing this to the whole bed. Then we're gonna build a lasagna bed. All right, so there you have it. I fully broad forked this whole bed. And you notice that as I was doing it, I started on that end, ended up here, because I don't wanna step on this bed anymore now that I've actually lifted the soil up. I've already broken up some of the compaction. So I want to preserve that as best as I can. And now we're gonna move on to the almost final step. I feel like I've said that a few times, but that's because there's always more steps along the way that I never think about. So what we're gonna do is, you can see all around me is there's straw mulch everywhere around this garden. This has been sitting here since maybe early summer. So what I'm gonna do is actually rake all that in, put it on top of the bed, then add the compost, and I'll tell you why in a second. So what I'm gonna do now is rake up all the straw, put it on top. While I'm doing that, I'll tell you guys what I mean when I say a lasagna bed. So a lasagna bed is a classic kind of no-dig or low-till, no-till bed building style. A lot of times people do it with cardboard and straw. And the basic idea here, the only things that really matter are that we get a carbon layer. So that would be either the cardboard or in this case straw. And this straw has been already broken down pretty substantially by just sitting on the surface over the summer. So that's great, because what this is going to do is it's going to add a lot of moisture retention, but more importantly, it's going to add a lot of carbon. So straw is one of these perfect carbon ingredients where it has a really high carbon to nitrogen ratio. And really the beauty of straw that I find is that worms go absolutely crazy for it. So by putting this here and then putting the compost on top, the reason why it's called a lasagna bed is that I guess you could think of this as being like the ricotta, and then the compost is going to be like the noodles on top, or vice versa, whatever you want to call it. But the idea is that this is going to be the carbon layer, and the compost on top is going to be a source of nitrogen since it's manure based, and it's also going to act as a mulch on top of this mulch. But really the main goal is that worms are looking for carbon. That's one of their favorite nutrients to break down. And this is also going to be really great for any of the bacterial or fungal life in here, because it's going to create a lot of little pockets. And as the worms start pulling on the carbon, or the straw in this case, and pulling it down and breaking it up, it's going to create this whole different soil food web in the bed itself. And that's fantastic. The more we could get our soil to work for us, the easier it is to be a gardener. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but one of the biggest ones are the mycorrhizal association that you could get. And what that means is basically you have these fungal networks, the mycorrhizae, and what they're doing is there might be a mushroom right here, but that mycorrhizal network might be throughout the entire bed. So what's happening is the plants are releasing something called a root exudate, which is a sort of little nutrition package that things in the soil are seeking, whether that's worms, bugs, nematodes, fungus. And in exchange, the other thing, like for example, a worm is going to leave its castings. And those castings are going to provide nutrients that are available for the plant to use right away. There's a lot of nutrients locked up in soil because it is a mineral, but the plants aren't able to extract every bit of it immediately. So that soil food web is acting as the intermediary to provide the breakdown of those minerals and allow those nutrients to be immediately bioavailable for the plant. So all we're doing here is we're building soil, and that's really the most important thing you could do as a gardener. So yeah, here we go. I'm going to spread out the rest of this carbon layer, and then we're going to go ahead and throw the compost on top. Now we have our carbon layer down, so now the secret ingredient is the compost. So I've got a full wheelbarrow load here. I might need more than that. I'm really going for like 2 inches here, but what I'm going to start doing is just dumping it on the bed. And then I'll come back in with the rake, spread it out, level it, and see how much more or not I need. Now you might think I'm burying that pepper plant there, but I'm not really too worried about it. Peppers can be buried a little bit. I'm going to avoid trying to bury it too much, but if it gets a little buried, I'm not worried about it. Okay, a little bit more. This might be enough, but let's spread it out and then we'll have a real idea. All right, already I can tell this is definitely enough compost. Maybe a little overkill, but I'm not too worried about it. I'm basically gonna just try to spread it out best I can. If it overlaps the bed a little bit, I'm okay with that. I have lost a little bit of this bed width over time, just as it started to lose its shape. So in reality, I'm actually kind of coming back to the original bed shape and size that I had. And you'll notice I'm not going to be packing this down or anything. I'm simply going to be spreading it on top. And then I'm probably going to give it a water with the hose before putting the drip irrigation back on top. And then from there, we're pretty much good to go. I've got to say, I'm quite pleased with how this came out. This is a very satisfying job I just did. I've never had enough compost to properly do this before. When I built these beds, I was relying on the amount of compost I've already made, which was, let's just say, maybe half a wheelbarrow. So this is quite a substantial improvement in terms of compost, and really this is going to bump my organic matter, meaning like debris from plants, content up a lot higher in my soil. So overall, this is going towards building long-term soil health. What you'll see is I'll do a little side-by-side comparison of the other bed, which we're not going to get to today. But basically, I've raised this bed by what's got to be at least 2 to 3 inches in the end, which is fantastic. It makes it a lot more defined. The only other thing I really have to do is come back and remulch all this area around me where I've scraped the mulch into the bed. But beyond that, the only thing left to do with this bed is plant it. And what I'm going to plant in here is broccoli. Earlier I mentioned that I don't want plants on this side of the bed here. And the reason why is that I'm going to put broccoli on that side of the bed. And on the other side, I'm going to put more short growing crops like pak choi, bok choy, things of that nature. And the reason for that is that as the sun comes in, it comes in at this angle. So I want my tall, bushier plants on this side. And the plants that could get away with a little less sun, that aren't going to shade out anything else, are going to go on that side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this little handy ruler that I have here, and I have this little junction here, and this is exactly 18 inches. And previously I've planted broccoli a lot tighter than that, but I found that the head production was a lot smaller and it had a lot more issues. So this year, one of my new goals and experiments is give these plants a lot more space. Now, it's not to say that you have to. If you actually like your broccoli to be a smaller head, just plant them closer together, no big deal. The only difference is you're gonna have to come back and water more often. So I'm gonna go ahead and lay these out and pop them in the ground, and I'll see you then. So what you see here is that actually I have a little more space. So rather than try to cram another plant in, I'm actually gonna just go ahead and bump all these plants a couple inches, because really I wanna give them the best chance they have to produce nice big broccoli heads. So one more shift. All right, so that's gonna be my final placement. It's closer to about 22 inches, which I'm perfectly happy with. So I'm gonna go ahead, pop these in the ground, and I'll show you what I do when I do that. All right, so now we're on to the actual planting here. And so like I said, these are broccoli plants, but I am gonna put something in the hole. This is a very common way to amend your bed, is adding a little fertilizer in the hole as you plant it. There's 3 different things going on here. This is azomite, which provides, it's like a volcanic rock dust. It provides a lot of trace nutrients that plants often can be missing. So adding it in there is going to improve the flavor, improve the vigor, kind of smooth out any problems you might have. This over here are worm castings. These are fantastic because they're full of very mild nutrients. They're also very probiotically alive. So this is going to provide a lot of benefit to the soil biome. This last one here is a special compost. It comes from SD microbes. This is called a biovast compost. It's extremely fungally dominated, and now usually brassica plants, which is what a broccoli is, don't necessarily benefit as much from a mycorrhizal association, but some more recent studies have shown that actually there is some benefit here. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this in 3 of the different planting holes and try to keep an eye on it and basically flag it with these so I can know that I added that amendment to those and not the others. So I'm gonna go ahead and bring you in close as I do this so you can see what it looks like under there. All right, so remember, this is a no-dig lasagna bed. So what I'm digging in through right now is the compost I put on the surface, a layer of straw, you can see some of that, and then the native soil underneath. I'm gonna go ahead and just pop it on top. I'm not really worried about where it goes. And then do a little test fit. I always like to do that so I know exactly where I'm gonna actually put the plant. But since I'm adding all these amendments to the hole, I'm gonna actually dig out the bottom a little further. And then I'm gonna go ahead, take a scoop of the rock dust, throw it around in there. That's gonna allow the roots to find it. Take a bigger scoop of worm castings. And again, I'm gonna put some all around, kind of mash it down in there. And then the last thing is I'm gonna add some of that specialty compost to this hole. So this is gonna be one of the plants that I flag. Okay, so still good on the test fit there. So I'm gonna go ahead, pop this plant out. And look at that. So that's a pretty ideal root structure. Unfortunately, I will say that this is a little dry, but it's got roots all the way around. They're not really bunched up or tangled. All I'm gonna do is kind of loosen up the bottom and just kind of go like that. So now I have these roots and they're able to go looking for nutrients. I'm gonna go ahead and pop that in, firm it up, and I'm just gonna smooth this top out. Last thing I wanna do is actually provide it a little bit of water, because I'm not gonna likely run the drip irrigation for a while. And also the drip irrigation is not gonna be targeted right where this plant is. So I'm gonna just hit it with some water and let that kind of percolate down. That also is gonna help make sure that those roots are in contact with the soil. And one thing I like that I see right now is that the water is pulling a little bit, but then it's immediately draining down into the soil below. So that's pretty ideal. I'm gonna go ahead and do the rest of these. Here's my little flag to demonstrate that I've put that special compost there. And that's it. All right, so now I just need to go ahead and plant the other 5 plants. I obviously got a little ambitious at the start of the video when I said I was gonna flip both these beds, do all these things. But instead I got a little bit in the weeds of telling you guys all the details on the in-between of the process. So I hope that was actually really useful for you guys, because I wanted to try to give you guys as much detail as possible. Now my goal is always to give you guys as much of like the science that I can, but I also don't want to kind of overwhelm it by getting too detailed, which is something I tend to do. So I'd love to have your guys' feedback as to whether that was a well-paced video, whether that gave you all the details you were looking for. If not, I'd be absolutely happy to make another video on this topic, expanding in any direction you guys want me to go. And again, this one's gonna get that specialty compost. So I'm gonna go ahead and flag that. But yeah, so I'm gonna go ahead and finish planning out this bed. And I hope you guys really enjoyed this video. If you did, like I said, I really do appreciate a like. If you're not subscribed already, please do. We're only just getting started. And thanks for watching, guys. Until next time.